Welcome to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba. Thanks for joining us. I've got Shepard Doniger, but I call him Shep, President and CEO of Black Dog Communications on the show with me. Shep, welcome to the show.
Michael, thank you for having me on.
All right. Now, you're very experienced with a lot of business folks, and you're clear with the public relations versus advertising practices. Bring that out for us, because there's a lot of people that are wrestling with these topics that you've got so much experience on, and I know they can just, the wealth of information and the wealth of knowledge you bring to the table, they're going to be able to learn something today.
Well, Michael, thanks for the introduction. One of the either questions I get or one of the confusions that I still see in the marketplace is the difference between advertising and public relations. I've always been a devotee of public relations. I've worked on both sides of the coin. And the truth of the matter is public relations is, more often than not, the most credible way to build your brand, get your name out there, because it focuses on the third-party validation and endorsement of folks who don't necessarily have to do that for you, versus advertising, where you've actually paid for the space. Now, there's nothing wrong with advertising, and it's a great way to reinforce your brand and your message. But the most credible way, the most valid way to do it is through public relations. And that's working with the media, creating the right strategy, creating the right message, getting it in front of the right audiences, and then using that information, the coverage that you've gained, to re-merchandise it to get your name and your brand, your product, your services out there. As a matter of fact, I would just close by saying this. Advertising often relies heavily on public relations. So in other words, take a movie, for example. What's one thing that they do all the time? They use the reviews from places like the New York Times and Hollywood Magazine and Variety to tout a movie in an advertisement, because they're using credible third-party validation for that movie to get the message out.
What are the common issues you encounter every day?
Well, the most common issues are that companies, be it the individuals at the companies themselves, aren't creating enough news, or think they have news that really isn't necessarily news in the marketplace. And when they do have something to say, they may not be targeting it at the audience that's going to help their bottom lines, because it's not coverage for coverage's sake. It's coverage, it's attention that validates and impacts an audience that you want to reach, whether that's an investor audience because you're looking to raise money, whether it's something related to sales because you have a product and you want consumers to know more about it. You've got to reach the right audience. So getting a piece of coverage that doesn't necessarily impact your audience because you're talking about A, but your audience wants to hear about B, we run into that quite often. That's one of the things that companies often miss. The other thing is, it is important for companies, once they start a campaign, not to go dark, to find ways, even if they have to create some news where there isn't necessarily news, to keep a presence out there, both in front of the media and in front of the audiences they want to reach.
I agree 100%. Now, sometimes people come to you in crisis, and there's the right and the wrong way to handle that.
Well, often we get crisis situations. The right way to handle it for everybody is to prepare for it in advance. Make the assumption that something's going to happen to your business, to your brand, to one of your people, even if you don't think you're in a high-risk environment. So, for example, if you're in the industrial gas business, it is likely and unfortunate that at some point in time, you're going to have a crisis to deal with. If you're selling books, you may not think that, but you should be creative in the way you think and say, well, what could happen to me that would be a crisis? So you want to prepare in advance. That's number one. Number two, well, how am I going to handle this crisis? The first thing you need to do is try and create, as best you can, a crisis plan, either by working with a professional, or if you have to and you can't afford to, you work inside and you say, well, what kind of crises might I face? What questions might I get, and what answers do I want to give to that? Three, you want to try and be, as often as possible, as transparent as possible. Because in this day and age, with what happens in the online environment and through social media, you have to make the assumption that it's going to be very difficult to keep all of the information in-house. So try and anticipate, plan in advance, assume there's going to be something, and hope you never have to use it. So be prepared for the worst, and hopefully the best will work out for you.
What about the difference between running a political campaign and, say, a regular economic campaign for your business?
Well, people used to think, and I wasn't one of these people, that there were tremendous differences. I think the idea of a campaign is just that, as you said, it's a campaign. And whether we're looking to get somebody to support a candidate or a ballot initiative and go into a voting booth and pull a lever and support something, or support a brand by purchasing that brand's product or products, or just getting behind that brand, it's all, to me, part of the same communications environment. It's running a campaign to achieve a goal at a specific time. So on election day, usually a Tuesday in November, that campaign or any particular campaign is looking to get folks into the booth to vote for or sometimes against somebody else. When you're selling a product, you're looking for folks to go to a particular store and make a destination purchase so that when they're in that store, they're going to your product and looking for your brands. So they're very much the same in many ways.
What about measuring success?
Michael, I would say, sorry to interrupt, but I would say this. A lot of the product and brand capabilities that we see today in terms of polling and focus groups and so on and so forth really grew out of the political realm starting way back in the 60s and into the 70s. And of course, polling and data and strategy all comes out of that.
Yes, I get it. I've had several campaigns that come through my doors, and we've talked to them, but never quite looked at it from your perspective. All right, it all boils down to the bottom line, measuring success at the end of the day. Talk to me about that.
Well, measuring success, if you're in business, is, am I getting my point across? Am I building my brand? Am I achieving the sales objectives and other objectives for the company that I have? Am I raising the money that I want? And in the end, that's the only measurement that counts. I don't think it really matters if you reach 83 million people, if 80 million out of the 83 million aren't necessarily your targets, but the target is composed of another 40 million people. So the key is having the right strategy, the right message to the right audiences, making sure they get it. And once you achieve the coverage that you want, let's pick an outlet. Let's say you wanted coverage in the Wall Street Journal. You can't assume that the audience you want to reach has read the Wall Street Journal that day, either in hard copy or online. So the real key is, how do I re-merchandise that coverage, that positive coverage that I receive that will help my business to get it out to the audiences I want to reach? And many companies have lengthy email lists and contact lists of folks who are investors, who have shown an interest, who've contacted the company before. They have social media pages that they can use. The CEO or other managers can use that information on their LinkedIn pages, which has become very popular. It's re-merchandising the original third-party validated coverage and getting the impact out of that.
Good. Great wisdom today. Shep, thanks for being a guest on the show.
Thank you for having me on, Michael. I appreciate it.
Mine too. All right. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching CEO Money with Michael Yorba.